The summer sun beat down on Vieira Soto Avenue as Marina Ribeiro gazed at the Ipanema Sea from the balcony of her triplex penthouse. Her blonde hair perfectly styled and nails freshly done, she rolled her eyes while holding the phone to her ear, listening to her mother, Valeria, repeat for the third time that she needed to travel to the countryside of Minas Gerais. "No, Mom, you're not understanding. I have the launch of Arta's new collection on Friday, and then a weekend in Angra with the Vogue crowd. I simply can't go to the middle of nowhere to deal with land issues that shouldn't even exist," she protested, adjusting her designer sunglasses as a maid discreetly placed a mimosa on the side table. "Marina, this isn't optional." Valeria's voice was firm on the other end of the line. "The lands in Vale dos Ipês are under legal dispute, and we need a family member present to handle the proceedings. Your father is closing deals. In Europe, I have the Foundation's charity event, and your siblings are out of the country. You're the only one available." Marina sighed dramatically, glancing at her digital calendar filled with social commitments, all meticulously organized by her assistant. "Can't this be handled by a lawyer? Why do we pay that expensive firm? In São Paulo? Sweetheart, these are lands that have been in our family for 3 generations. The judge demanded the presence of a Ribeiro family representative. They claim part of the documentation was falsified decades ago." Valeria paused. "Besides, you haven't done anything since you returned from that sham postgraduate program in Paris. It's time you learned to handle the family business." Marina looked at her perfectly manicured nails and resisted the urge to protest again. She knew when her mother used that tone, the battle was lost. "How long?" she asked, defeated. "A few weeks, maybe a month. Marcelo Jardim, the local manager, will help you with everything. He knows all the details of the case and the property." She rolled her eyes at the name. Probably some middle-aged country bumpkin who had never seen the ocean or stepped foot in a Michelin-starred restaurant. "Great. I'll have to deal with a hillbilly," she muttered. "He's competent, Marina, and crucial to resolving this situation. Treat him with respect. Always remember, the Ribeiros don't mingle, but they know how to treat employees to get what they need." 3 days later, Marina stared disdainfully out the window of the SUV, driving her from the small regional airport to the town of Serra Dourada, where the headquarters of the Vale dos Ipês farm was located. The monotonous landscape of mountains and crops seemed endless, and the cell signal flickered constantly as if mocking her. "How much longer until we arrive?" she asked the driver, an elderly man with graying hair who had introduced himself as Mr. Antonio. "About 40 more minutes, Miss Marina," he replied with a gentle smile through the rearview mirror. "The road is good, but it's a long way. The Vale is deep in the heart of the mountains." She sighed, adjusting her silk scarf and checking her makeup in her compact mirror. She had opted for what she considered a casual chic look. Designer. White pants, a silk blouse, and shoes that were definitely not suited for the countryside. Her 3 trunks of luggage had followed in another car, likely filled with equally inappropriate outfits for rural life. When they finally arrived in town, Marina eyed the simple buildings, the central square with its old church, and the locals, strolling leisurely under the tree-lined streets with disdain. Some glanced curiously at the imported car passing through, and she shrunk back in her seat, as if the mere gaze of these people could contaminate her. "Let's go straight to the farm, please," she instructed, avoiding eye contact with the locals. Mr. Antonio smiled again. "Don't you want to see the town first, Miss Marina? Serra Dourada is famous for its coffee and milk candies. There's a confectionery here that—" "No, thank you," she cut him off sharply. "I just want to get there and resolve this situation as quickly as possible." The gates of Vale dos Ipês appeared after another 20 minutes on the road. An imposing stone and wood structure marked the entrance to the vast property. As they drove down the long dirt road leading to the main house, Marina had to admit, if only to herself, that the place had a striking rustic beauty. Lush green mountains framed well-kept pastures and crops, stretching as far as the eye could see. The main house, a restored colonial building, stood imposingly with its 2 stories and wide porch. At the entrance, a group of employees waited, and at the front stood a tall man wearing jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt. When the car stopped, Marina took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what she considered her temporary exile. The driver opened. The door, and she stepped out, immediately feeling the weight of the fresh air and the mild warmth of the mountain region. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt, and she grimaced in displeasure. "Miss Ribeiro?" The man in the plaid shirt approached, extending his hand. "I'm Marcelo Jardim, manager of Valdosipes. Welcome." Marina quickly assessed him. To her surprise, Marcelo wasn't the middle-aged man she had imagined. He looked to be in his early 30s, with short, brown hair, broad shoulders, and intense green eyes that met hers directly. His sun-tanned face had strong features, and she noticed that despite his simple clothes, he carried himself with a natural confidence and authority. She reluctantly extended her hand, barely touching his. "It's Marina," she corrected with a forced smile. "I hope everything is ready for my stay. I want to resolve this inconvenience as quickly as possible and return to Rio." A slight smile appeared at the corner of Marcelo's lips, as if he had expected this cold reception. "Of course, Marina. We've prepared the main bedroom for you, and tomorrow we can start reviewing all the documentation. The judge has scheduled a preliminary hearing for next week." "A week?" she exclaimed, horrified. "My mother said it would be a matter of days." Marcelo shook his head slowly. "Unfortunately, the process is more complex than your family was initially informed. There are disputes over the property boundaries dating back decades." Marina felt her stomach sink. The idea of being stuck in this backwater longer than expected was unbearable. She looked around at the employees watching the scene with discreet curiosity, at the main house that, while beautiful, certainly lacked the comforts she was used to, and finally at Marcelo, whose calm gaze seemed to see through her thinly veiled disdain. "Fine," she said finally, "but I expect minimal comfort and decent internet. I have professional commitments that can't wait." "We've done our best to accommodate your needs," he replied with a formality that didn't entirely hide a hint of irony. "We have satellite internet, but I should warn you that when it rains heavily, the signal can drop." She rolled her eyes, grabbing her designer bag. "Wonderful, civilization is truly behind us." Following Marcelo into the house, Marina mentally prepared herself for what she believed would be the worst weeks of her life. Little did she know that Valdosipes held secrets that would forever change her worldview, and most importantly, her view of herself. Marina's first week at Valdosipes was exactly as she had imagined, unbearable. Meetings with local lawyers were tedious, the internet kept dropping, and the lack of Japanese food delivery was almost a crime. But nothing irritated her more than Marcelo Jardim's constant presence. The manager seemed to be everywhere at once, solving problems, with a quiet efficiency she would never admit to admiring. While she complained about the heat, dust, and insects, he went about his routine unperturbed, waking before sunrise, overseeing fieldwork, handling legal paperwork, and still finding time to chat with every employee by name. On Thursday morning, Marina was on the porch of the main house, trying for the third time to video call her friends in Rio, when Marcelo approached. "Signal problems?" he asked, carrying some folders. "No, I'm pretending to talk to myself because I love looking crazy," she replied sarcastically, ending the call in frustration. "How do you people live like this, so disconnected?" Marcelo leaned on the wooden railing, gazing at the vast farm. "Maybe we're connected to different things," he replied simply. "Here, we feel the pulse of the land, the rhythm of the seasons, the life growing under our care. It's a more tangible connection than likes on edited photos." Marina rolled her eyes. "Wow, so deep. Did you get that from a self-help book? For farmers?" He just smiled, unfazed by her sharp comment. "I have some updates on the legal case. We found old documents in the municipal archives that might help clarify the property boundaries. If you'd like to review them with me, of course, because there's nothing more exciting in the world than spending my day looking at yellowed papers," she interrupted, standing up. "But since I'm stuck in this backwater, let's..." Kaisi sois. In the farm's office, Marcelo spread the documents on a large wooden table. Old maps, deeds, and sepia photographs told the story of the region and the farm. Against her will, Marina found herself intrigued. "This is the original property map from 1923, Marcelo explained, pointing to a carefully preserved document. "That's when your great-grandfather acquired the first lands here." Notice how the boundaries differ from the current ones. Marina leaned over the map, noting the discrepancies. Why did they change so much? That's exactly the issue in dispute, he replied, showing another document. According to records, there was a significant expansion in 1945 after World War II, but there are indications that this expansion may not have followed all the legal procedures of the time. Are you suggesting my family acted in bad faith? She asked, suddenly defensive. Marcelo looked at her calmly. I'm just presenting facts, Marina. The documents suggest irregularities, and we need to understand what happened to defend your family's position properly. She crossed her arms, irritated both by the situation and her inability to find flaws in Marcelo's logic. And who's contesting these lands now? Some opportunist looking for easy money? Actually, they're descendants of small landowners who lived here before the expansion of Valdosipez, he explained, showing old photographs of families in front of simple homes. They claim their ancestors were forced to sell or simply driven off their lands. Marina felt a discomfort she tried to mask with more arrogance. Well, that was almost 80 years ago. Why are they only complaining now? Important documents only recently surfaced during the digitization of municipal archives, Marcelo explained patiently. Plus, these families only now have the resources to hire lawyers. The rest of the afternoon was spent reviewing documents and preparing strategies for the hearing the following week. Despite her initial resistance, Marina found herself absorbed in the work, uncovering details about her family's history she had never heard before. By nightfall, when they finally finished, she felt mentally exhausted, but strangely satisfied. I think we deserve a drink after all that, Marcelo commented, carefully storing the documents. If you're interested, we have artisanal cachaça produced right here on the farm. Marina hesitated. Socializing with Marcelo wasn't in her plans, but the prospect of another lonely night in her room, struggling with the internet, was equally unappealing. Fine, she agreed finally. But if it's the kind of cachaça that burns your soul, I'll hold you personally responsible. On the porch of the main house under a starry sky Marina rarely saw in Rio, they sat in rustic rocking chairs. Marcelo poured 2 glasses of amber cachaça into crystal tumblers. Surprisingly civilized, she commented, accepting the glass. We believe the finer things in life deserve to be appreciated properly, he replied, raising his glass. In a silent toast before taking a small sip, Marina tasted the drink and had to admit it was exceptionally good, smooth, aromatic, with notes of wood and a touch of natural sweetness. Not bad for a local production, she conceded, observing the golden liquid in her glass. Local doesn't mean inferior, Marina, Marcelo said calmly. Sometimes we're so obsessed with what comes from afar that we don't appreciate the treasures right in front of us. Silence fell between them, filled only by the night sounds of the farm. Crickets, the wind in the leaves, the occasional distant moo of cattle. Suddenly Marcelo's phone rang, breaking the moment. Sorry, he said, answering quickly. His expression grew serious as he listened. I understand. Yes, I'll be there tomorrow. No, don't worry, I'll handle it personally. Marina watched him curiously. When he hung up, she asked, Problems with the case? Not exactly, he replied, putting his phone away. A personal matter I need to handle in town tomorrow. Actually, he hesitated briefly. If you'd like to see Serra Dourada, you could come with me. It'll be a good opportunity for you to understand the local context better. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately, but another part, one that rarely had a voice, was tired of the self-imposed isolation at the farm. Why not? She replied with studied indifference. Maybe I'll find a civilized store to buy insect repellent that actually works. The next morning, they set off in Marcelo's pickup truck. Marina, wearing a simple dress, the most casual she could find in her luggage, and sunglasses, watched the landscape with an interest she tried to hide. This region was once covered by Atlantic forest, Marcelo explained as he drove. In recent years, we've been working on a reforestation project in the non-productive areas of the farm. We? She questioned. I thought you were just a manager hired by my family. He smiled enigmatically. I have a personal interest in preserving this land. When they arrived in town, Marina was surprised by how warmly Marcelo was greeted. Everyone from shopkeepers to the mayor, whom they happened to meet in the central square, treated him with respect and familiarity. "Jardim," the middle-aged man exclaimed, approaching for a warm hug. "Have you heard the news about the school?" The approval came through yesterday. "Great news, Mayor," Marcelo replied with a genuine smile. "We'll be able to start construction next month." "Thanks to your support, young man." The mayor then noticed Marina. "And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Marina Ribeiro," Marcelo introduced. "She's here representing the family in the land dispute." The mayor's expression shifted subtly. "Ah, yes, the Ribeiros," he said with sudden formality. "I hope you're enjoying our town, miss." "It's charming," she replied, diplomatically, intrigued by the man's change in attitude. After parting ways with the mayor, Marina couldn't contain her curiosity. "What school were you talking about? And why did the mayor get so weird when you mentioned my last name?" Marcelo guided her to a cafe on the square, where they took a table on the porch. "We're building an agricultural technical school for the region's youth," he explained, after ordering coffee. "As for the mayor's reaction, well, the relationship between your family and the local community has always been complicated. The Ribeiros rarely visit the property, never participate in local life, and historically have made decisions that don't always benefit the region." Marina felt her face flush. "Are we talking about the land dispute again?" "Among other things," he replied calmly. "For example, 10 years ago, your family vetoed a road project that would connect isolated rural communities because it would pass through a corner of Val dos Ipés. I didn't know that," she admitted, genuinely surprised. "We've never been involved in the details of managing the farm." "That's exactly the problem, don't you think?" Marcelo asked, his green eyes fixed on hers. "You own vast lands, employ dozens of families, directly impact the region's development, yet treat it all as a line in a financial report." Marina felt uncomfortably exposed. "And you, Marcelo? Why do you care so much? You're just an employee." He took a sip of coffee before answering. "Let's just say I have deep roots in this land." After coffee, they continued their tour of the town. Marcelo had some business at the local bank, and Marina took the opportunity to explore the shops around the square. To her surprise, she found impressive local crafts, pottery, embroidery, and jewelry made with regional stones. "Did you find something you like?" Marcelo asked, reappearing as she admired a pair of silver earrings with small, colorful stones. "Are these real stones?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Yes, aquamarines from the region," he confirmed. "This area was once known for mining these stones in the 19th century. That's why it's called Valle dos Ipés, which was previously known as Val das Aguas Azuis." "I didn't know that," she murmured, feeling ignorant about something tied to her own family's history. In the afternoon, Marcelo took her to see a social project on the outskirts of town, a women's cooperative producing organic food and crafts. To Marina's surprise, she discovered that much of the funding came from an anonymous investor. When they returned to the farm late that afternoon, she was uncomfortably thoughtful. The image she had built of Marcelo as a simple farm manager had been completely challenged. He clearly wielded influence in the region, knew everyone, supported social projects, and seemed genuinely concerned for the community's well-being. During dinner at the main house, served by the housekeeper, Donna Zulmira, Marina finally decided to satisfy her curiosity. "Marcelo, where exactly are you from? How did you end up working for my family?" He looked at her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I was born and raised here in Serra Dourada. My family has a small property next to Vale dos Ipés. I studied agronomy and business in São Paulo, worked abroad for a few years, and when I returned, I took over managing your family's farm." "Why did you come back?" she pressed. "Someone with your education could have stayed in São Paulo, earned much more." An enigmatic smile appeared on his lips. "Not everything in life is about money, Marina," Marcelo replied, his tone calm but firm. "Some people find purpose in other things." He paused, studying her with those piercing green eyes. But you don't believe that, do you? For you, status and wealth are the measures of everything. Marina felt a sting of offense at the accuracy of his observation. You don't know me, she shot back, her voice sharp. I know enough, he countered, his voice steady. I've seen how you look at the farm workers, how you talk about the town, how you dismiss everything that doesn't meet your standards. It's the same way your family has looked at this region for generations. She stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. Who do you think you are to judge me like that? Some country boy who got lucky enough to study abroad and now thinks he's better than everyone else. You're just an employee of my family. Remember your place. The moment the words left her mouth, Marina knew she had gone too far. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcelo remained calm, simply watching her with an unreadable expression. I think it's late, he said, finally standing up. We have the hearing tomorrow and need to be prepared. Good night, Marina. He left the dining room, leaving her alone with her anger and, surprisingly, a growing sense of shame. The next morning, the tension between them was palpable as they prepared for the hearing at the town courthouse. Marina tried several times to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat, suffocated by years of conditioning that had taught her people like her didn't owe explanations to people like him. What she didn't know was that the day at the courthouse held a revelation that would turn her world upside down, forcing her to question everything she had ever believed about her family, about Marcelo, and, most importantly, about herself. The Serra Dourada courthouse was a restored colonial building imposing in its simplicity. When Marina and Marcelo arrived, lawyers and onlookers were already gathered in the lobby. She felt their eyes on her, some curious, others clearly hostile. Dressed in an impeccable pantsuit and high heels, she felt like an alien intruder in this place, where everyone seemed to know each other. Don't worry, Marcelo murmured beside her. Stay focused on the documents we reviewed. Our lawyer is already in the courtroom. Marina nodded, unable to look him in the eye after the harsh words of the previous night. Guilt was a new feeling for her, as uncomfortable as tight shoes. In the courtroom, Judge Oliveira, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, reviewed documents as the parties took their places. On the other side, Marina noticed a group of about 10 people, simple men and women, clearly nervous but determined. They were the descendants of the families contesting the land. We can begin, the judge announced after the formalities. As everyone knows, we're here to preliminarily review the disputes over the boundaries of the Vale dos Ipés farm, owned by the Ribeiro family since 1923, but with expansions questioned starting in 1945. The lawyer hired by Marina's family, Dr. Mendez, stood first, presenting documents proving ownership and detailing the history of acquisitions. As he spoke, Marina watched Marcelo, who remained attentive to every word, occasionally making notes. Next, the opposing lawyer, a young and energetic man named Dr. Castro, stood. Your Honor, we have concrete evidence that the 1945 expansion of Vale dos Ipés involved coercion and fraudulent documentation. Entire families were displaced from lands they had occupied for generations. He paused dramatically. And today we have someone who can testify to the true history of these lands. A murmur spread through the room. The judge called for silence and allowed the witness to be presented. I call Mr. Eduardo Jardim to testify, announced Dr. Castro. Marina felt a jolt at the name. She turned sharply to Marcelo, who remained impassive, though a visible tension had settled in his jaw. An elderly man, around 80 years old, leaning on a cane, walked slowly to the front of the room. He had the same intense green eyes as Marcelo, and carried a dignity that his simple clothes couldn't diminish. Mr. Jardim, please tell the court your connection to the disputed lands, the lawyer requested. The old man cleared his throat before speaking. My name is Eduardo Jardim, son of Tiago Jardim and grandson of Wilson Jardim, who founded the Horizonte farm, which bordered what is now Vale dos Ipés. His voice, though weak, was clear. In 1945, shortly after the war, Roberto Ribeiro, who had expanded his business during the conflict, decided he wanted our land, and that of 5 other families in the region, to increase his production. Marina felt her stomach drop. Roberto Ribeiro was her great-grandfather, a name she had always heard spoken with reverence in her family. He used his influence and money to pressure our families, Eduardo continued. Some were forced to sell at unfair prices. Others, like my grandfather, refused. But Roberto didn't stop. He falsified documents, bribed officials, and eventually took our land by force. My family lost everything. The room was silent as Eduardo finished his testimony. Marina's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. She glanced at Marcelo, who sat stoically, his expression unreadable. "Your Honor," Dr. Castro said, breaking the silence. "This testimony, along with the documents we've submitted, proves that the Ribeiro family's expansion was built on fraud and coercion. We request that the court recognize the rights of the original families and return the lands to their rightful owners." Marina's lawyer stood to object, but the judge raised a hand. "I've heard enough for today," he said. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to hear the Ribeiro family's defense. Court is adjourned." As the room emptied, Marina felt numb. She turned to Marcelo, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you know about this?" He met her gaze, his expression softening. "Yes," he admitted. "But it wasn't my place to tell you. This is something your family needed to face." "And Hugo?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who are you, really?" Marcelo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Eduardo Jardim is my grandfather," he said quietly. "I came back to Serra Dourada to fight for what's right, not just for my family, but for all the families who were wronged." Marina felt the weight of his words settle over her. Everything she had believed about her family, about herself, was crumbling. She looked at Marcelo, really looked at him, and saw not just a farm manager, but a man who had dedicated his life to justice. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. "Now," Marcelo said, standing and offering her his hand. "We make things right." Marina hesitated, then took his hand. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with wealth or status. Together, they walked out of the courthouse, ready to face whatever came next.